Okay, good morning, people. Um, welcome to Tuesday, July 28th. Second last week of class. We're getting there. We're close. Let's see who's here. So Carmen's here. Good morning, Carmen. Lily's here. Good morning, Lily. Hello again, Thika. Good evening to you. Good morning, Eliana. Jimmy's here. Good morning, Jimmy. Ying is here. Good morning, Ying. Sabrina's here. Morning, Sabrina. Mashid's here. Hello again, Mashid. Good morning, Min. Jenna's here. Hello, Jenna. Cindy's here. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, Pearly. Karen's here. Hello again, Karen. Hello again, Casey. And Lim is here as well. Good morning, Lim. Okay, so today what we'll do is we'll continue with Rome. Obviously, I asked you to do a bit of reading and answer some questions. Some of what you read may have seemed like too much detail and it might have seemed boring. Hopefully it wasn't. But it actually will be important to know that stuff to talk about what's going to happen in Rome toward the end of the Republic. And so it is kind of, it is important to know this stuff. So I did have you read it for that reason. So I had you read that, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit more about Rome. Hello, Ella, and hello, Adalbert. We'll talk a little bit more about Rome, and then I have a bit of video for you to watch as well. So we'll get into that, and then maybe I'll talk just a little bit about citations, citing sources in the paper. I probably won't talk about that for very long because I don't have anything fully prepared, but I'm going to talk about it and hopefully it will be helpful for you as well. Good morning, Sam. Okay, so let's jump into this, okay? Whoops. Oh, yeah. Hang on. I forgot to do something. There we go. Okay. Yes. So, like I was saying, let's dive in. So yesterday we started talking about Rome, right? And we said that Rome was an important civilization, both in world history, but particularly for the West, because a lot of our ideas about law and government and architecture and art and politics and all kinds of things come to us either from Rome or from ancient Greek, but through Rome, right? Because we said that the Romans were, while being very traditional, were also very good at borrowing things from other cultures. And so they borrowed a significant amount of things from the Greeks who came before them. And so again, lots of the parts of Western culture that have come from Greece have actually come to us through Rome. As we'll see, Rome will eventually create a full-time army, a full-time military that will carry out their conquests throughout their empire. And of course, we've also mentioned very quickly that they will create a res publica. They'll create a republic, a public thing. And again, that this Roman Republic and the structures within the Republic and the way that it works will be inspirations for modern republics. Probably most notably how France's political system is designed in the 1800s, and of course the United States at the same time. Both of them will be, the US and France, and of course other countries as well, will be inspired by what happens in the Roman Republic. Of course, there's lots of other scientific and architectural technology that's developed by the Romans, which of course they will pass down to us, and much of which still stands. And so if you go to Rome or Italy or even other places in Europe today, you will find Roman ruins. You'll find Roman architectural ruins because, of course, the Roman Empire became quite large and they built things throughout that empire. But we said the whole thing starts back somewhere around 800 BCE, so about 2,800 years ago, where within Italy we have lots of different cultures occupying different areas, right? So we see Umbrian and Oscan and Greek cultures. There's Illyrians to the northeast. There's Venetics. There's Etruscans to the northwest, who are kind of one of the more powerful cultures in the region. The Greeks are as well at this period of time. Rome is kind of nothing at this time. And then there's a Punic civilization, which is present in North Africa, which are they're very powerful as well. And then there's a bunch of Gauls to the northwest. And so I'm kind of naming some of these because they'll be important in the story a little bit later. The Etruscans, the Punic civilization, the Gauls will all come into this story. But at the time, like I mentioned, Rome is just a nothing settlement with no power, and they are ruled by the Etruscans, right? We said yesterday that the Romans start out with a monarchy, and those monarchs, those kings, are actually Etruscan kings. They're not Romans. They're Etruscans. But the Romans are going to throw off their monarchs in a very similar way to the way the Athenians throw off their tyrant, and they're going to create a semi-democratic state, a republic. And as you can see, that republic is going to exist for about 500 years until events conspire to lead to an empire, to one person taking control. Yeah, so Rome begins as a small settlement in the 8th century BCE. It is, sorry, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit here, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. Starts out as a monarchy, proceeds through a republican phase for about 500 years, and then becomes an empire. So we're talking a little bit about its period under the Etruscans. We're going to move on to kind of the late republic here, and then we're going to talk about early empire. The topic of Rome is far too big to deal with in a few days. I actually took, in university, I think I took maybe 2 or 3 courses on Roman history, and I think I took a full course on the early republic and a full course on the late republic. And so I did like a solid year on just the Roman Republic, never mind the monarchy before and never mind the empire after. So, one of the things we've talked about in this class is that writing makes a big difference, right? If you have writing from the culture and you can actually read that writing, it tells you a lot about what was going on. And from Rome, we not only can we read Latin, and we always have been able to read Latin, but the Romans wrote down a huge amount of, kept a huge amount of records that we still have today. So we know incredible amounts of information about the Romans and how Roman history unfolded. And so again, we could easily spend full courses just looking at Rome. And so we're going to try and handle it in a few days. So we're just going to touch the very surface of what we know about Rome. So yesterday I asked you to read this section of the textbook, and you gave me some answers to these questions. And so you told me yesterday about the origin story of Rome, where 2 brothers, Remus and Romulus, are the founders of Rome. And so they're abandoned as infants. Sometimes their heritage or their ancestry changes depending on the version of the story that you read. But they're abandoned as infants. They are raised by a she-wolf, and they grow up to become men and to become kings. But in a dispute between these two brothers, and the dispute varies, the details of the dispute varies, Romulus actually kills Remus, and he becomes the first king of Rome. And so again, this is a very this is an unsettling origin story, right? Lots of origin stories of cities have to do with the acts of the gods or heroes or some kind of magical act or something like that. But here we have the origin story of a city being one brother murdering the other one, right? This is a dark start to the story of Rome, right? And very atypical in terms of origin stories for cities in the ancient world. Most of them have a glorious or exciting beginning. This is a dark beginning for Rome. But a popular origin story nonetheless, and one that the Romans continued to observe. And so every year they would have a festival called the Lupercal. And the Lupercal was a festival dedicated to the founding of Rome by Romulus. We said that prior to that, we had the Etruscan culture who was in charge of Rome. And so we said they're a very technologically advanced and artistic people. We have ideas about them, being very comfortable showing affection between men and women in public, which was something that both the Greeks and the Romans were not entirely comfortable with. But again, the Etruscans had a sort of a flourishing civilization, but also one with a bit of a dark side. And so we said that at the funerals of Etruscan noble people, noblemen, they would have slaves fight to the death. And so the Romans would kind of absorb this custom, and it would play out later on in gladiator matches. But the Romans borrowed more than just the practice of gladiators fighting with each other. There were elements of divination, so figuring out the will of the gods. Different aspects of religion and ritual the Romans would borrow from the Etruscans. The Romans would borrow certain architectural cues and elements as well. Not to mention the design of Roman tombs reflected sort of Etruscan designs. The custom of having a victory procession or a victory parade when a Roman general was victorious, that was adapted from an Etruscan custom. And so the Romans would have triumphs, they would call them, but that was borrowed from the Etruscans. Etruscan robes, so the way that the Etruscans dressed was sort of copied by the Romans. And again, language. A lot of Etruscan words are absorbed into the Latin language and continue to be used. So again, the Etruscans start off ruling the Romans, but the Romans also borrow heavily from them in the beginning. And so I showed you these, just a couple of examples of Etruscan artwork, a beautiful bronze statue here, a few sarcophagi, so coffins that people are buried in with sculptures on top of them, and here's a man and his wife kind of snuggling on top of their coffin. It's very cute. And of course, a very popular Etruscan bronze sculpture of a Greek monster, a chimera. One of the earlier Etruscan kings that I wanted to mention was Servius Tullius. He creates a foundation for Rome by giving Rome a senate, so a group of representatives that speak to the government. So the Senate is created by Servius Tullius, but also the census. And so the Romans have a census that determines their tax payments and their military service requirements and their rights. And again, that census will serve as the basis for organizing the Roman Republic as they go forward. We heard a little bit about Lucretia, who was a legendary heroine of Rome, the wife of a noble person and sort of, the gold standard for sort of purity and virtue of Roman women. But as the story goes, she is raped by the son of the king. And so the Romans, in fury, revolt, throw out the Etruscan kings, and after a period of civil war, finally are able to establish their independence with a republic. Something that's important that comes out of this story, however, is two things. One of which, of course, is that the revolt is led by this guy here, or one of these guys that leads the revolt is Lucius Junius Brutus, and the name Brutus will come back later. But the story of Lucretia and the overthrowing of the Etruscan king, King Tarquin, also was important to the Romans because it symbolized how a single powerful ruler could destroy the virtue and honor of Rome. And so the Romans forever afterwards were very skittish, very suspicious of anyone who was trying to gain too much power. And so you probably saw that in the reading today, is that there were a lot of sort of restrictions put in place to make sure that no one person could gain all the power. No one person could dominate Rome, right? And so again, the Romans were very suspicious of this. They didn't have good feelings about one person taking power. And even the Latin word for king, which is rex, even the word rex was it had a negative connotation. Like it was like rex, this was an awful thing, right? And so the Romans didn't really have any respect or affinity for kings, and when they built their republic, they tried to create a political system whereby no one person, no one man could gain too much power. And we sort of see that in what you read today. But that's important to remember. So the Romans create a res publica, right? A republic. I'll talk about that guy in a second. I'll talk about that in a second. But let's move on to the questions I asked you today, okay? So the first question I asked you was this. I asked you, what is the cursus honorum and how does it work? And so it's a little bit of a complicated thing. You might have had to work out an answer for it. But again, it will be important in the story that we tell either tomorrow or on Thursday. Okay, look at all you guys, stuff popping up. So Cindy says, the debate over plebeian access. So remember, the plebeians are kind of the lower people in Rome, right? The patricians are those top families who are descended from Rome's original Senate, and so they're kind of an upper class, if you will, and the plebeians are kind of everyone else who wasn't a slave. So there was a debate over plebeian access to political office. So the regular people felt they were being shut out of politics. And so they create this cursus honorum, a sequence or a ladder of political offices. Okay. So in this sequence or ladder of political offices, it says all offices were held for a term of 1 year. So that's important, right? You can't gain too much power if you're only in office for 1 year, right? So people have very short terms of office, so they can't do too much. They can't gain too much power in a year. Yeah, to prevent anyone from amassing too much power. Oh, and they had to wait 10 years between consulships. So consul is kind of the highest office that you can hold in ancient Rome. And if you hold it, you only hold it for a year. There's another consul that you have to agree with. So there's no one person, there's two people. And again, once you serve your year as consul, you can't be consul for another 10 years. Plus, there's age limits, right? So by the time you become consul, you're already about 40 years old at least, maybe more. And so if you can't be consul for another 10 years, now you're going to be at least 50 years old. And people in the ancient world didn't live to be quite as old as they do now. So as they mentioned in the textbook, the odds of you being consul twice are pretty narrow, right? If you achieved the consulship in ancient Rome, in the early Republic anyway, that was a huge honor for you and your family, but you probably wouldn't be able to do it twice. Aliana says also, each office had a minimum age requirement, right? And with special privileges for patricians to subtract 2 years, okay? Right, and so this thing came out of the debate about plebeian access. Good. KC says a sequence or ladder, political sequence where the offices were held for a year to prevent them from gaining too much power. Good. Preventing them from holding too much power. And you need to serve in the army for 10 years before you can even gain your first political office. So imagine you're 18 years old, you enter the army, you serve in the army for 10 years, and if you're lucky enough not to get killed, then you can hold your first political office at maybe 28, right? So you need to move up the ladder piece by piece. You can't just gain power in the Roman Republic just like that. Yeah, it's a sequence or ladder of political offices. Good. Okay. So what are some of these offices that we heard about? There's a bunch of different offices, right? And you kind of move up the ladder holding each position. Okay, so Dika says here, okay, that's probably for the last one, right? Yeah, so all of these offices have minimum age requirements, and again, you can only serve for 1 year, so you can't gain too much power. There's not too much you can do in a year. Right, so the prerequisite for holding any political office was 10 years of military service. Good. Okay, we've heard that. Okay, here's what we're looking for. So quaestors were one type of political office, right? And so this was kind of a government administration position. Sometimes you'd be supervising the mint. Sometimes you were assistant to the provincial governor. Sometimes you were an assistant to the consul. Yeah, so quaestors were one type of office. What other types of offices were there? This is an important one here. Pearlie says there were tribunes of the plebeians. So this is an important, I'm going to spend some time on this one here. This is an important office as well. And so to be a tribune, you could only be a plebeian, right? So no patricians were allowed. So you could only be one of the regular lower class of Romans to be a tribune. And tribunes had an important role in the government. And so when you had the assembly that were meeting and arguing about things and voting on things, the tribunes had a special place. So the tribune could introduce a law, okay? So they could say, I want you to vote on this law, which was important. But the tribunes also had the power of veto, okay? And so I don't know, some of you may have heard that word before, veto, and what it means in Latin is it means I forbid. Okay, veto is I forbid. And so tribunes had this power of veto, and so it meant that they could stop things from happening. They couldn't make things happen, but they could stop things from happening. So if the assembly, say, wanted to pass a law increasing taxes on only poor Romans and not rich Romans, so rich Romans could pay low taxes and poor Romans would pay higher taxes, the tribune of the plebeians would say, we veto, we forbid, and so they wouldn't be able to pass the law. So again, the tribunes couldn't make things happen, but they could stop things from happening if it wasn't in the best interests of the lower class, right? So the lower class always had a voice, and they could always keep themselves from being exploited by these tribunes, and the tribunes could stop things. We still use this in some government systems today. And so, for instance, Donald Trump, unfortunately, he has a veto. He has a presidential veto. And so if Congress passes something, he can stop it, right? So the president has, in some ways, he has a power of a plebeian tribune, right? And so the United States has kind of borrowed that idea from ancient Rome. So we still use vetoes today. And at the time, it was there to protect the lower classes. What else, though? What other government positions existed? What other government positions existed? So Pearlie's all over this one. Good work, Pearlie. So there's praetors, right? And so we've heard here, or we read here, that praetors could hold imperium, right? So they could be, a praetor could be an army commander. And so as praetor, you might be given a command, right, by the Senate, and the Senate might say, go to Illyrium and conquer it, right? And so the Senate would give you a command, and you would take your army and go and conquer Illyria if you could. So praetors could hold imperium, and they also served in military roles or in administrative capacity by the governing province. Good. Now, I think praetors could also be dictators, right? So this word dictator comes up as well. We'll talk about that in a second. Jimmy says here, quaestors were assigned to a particular duty for their year in office. They might supervise the mint or be an official. Good. There are consuls, right? So 2 consuls elected annually. They both have to be in agreement with each other, and again, they keep each other from gaining too much power because they oppose each other, right? No one consul can put themselves above the other because they have to cooperate, they have to agree. So the consul is the chief military commander, but also the head of the government, right? And in a way, you can almost imagine this like President of the United States, because the President of the United States is the head of the government, but also the commander-in-chief of the military. The difference here, of course, is that the Romans had 2 presidents, if you will. They had 2 consuls, which would allow one president from taking too much power. Right, so you have 2 consuls. Every 5 years we have censors elected, and the censor is in charge of taking the Roman census, counting everybody and figuring out how much taxes they owe and things like that. I'm going to go back to praetors here. So praetors can be elected dictator. So again, that's a word that we use in the modern world. but it actually comes from ancient Rome. And so the Romans recognized that sometimes a republic or a democracy wasn't very good at responding quickly enough. And so the Romans had a custom whereby they could elect a dictator. And so let's say Rome was under attack from barbarians, and a lot of decisions needed to be made and the city needed to be defended. Rome would elect a dictator. And so one of these praetors might be elected dictator for 6 months. And so as dictator, you had full power over Rome. So whatever you said, people did. You commanded the army, and you would do whatever you needed to do in order to defend Rome and safeguard it. And then when the threat was over, then you would give up your dictatorship, you would give up your absolute power, and the republic would continue to function as it normally would. And so the Romans had this kind of emergency button, if you will, to hit. And so if things were really bad and they were under attack and they needed a single person to take charge, they could elect a dictator. And again, he would have absolute power in Rome for 6 months to do whatever he needed to do to protect the city and to resolve the crisis. And then again, at the end of that 6 months, the dictator gives up his power and the republic continues to function as normal, in theory. We'll come back to that in a second, okay? Some of the Roman gods. Who do we hear about in this section? Ginny says we hear about Jupiter. So Jupiter is kind of the head of the gods, and again, he is pretty much directly borrowed from Zeus. And so the Romans borrow Zeus from Greek religion or Greek mythology, and they give him a new name, Jupiter. But Jupiter is effectively Zeus, right? And the same thing with his wife. In ancient Greece, Zeus's wife is Hera. Here in Rome, Jupiter's wife is Juno. And Juno is basically Hera with a different name. We hear about Minerva, who is basically Athena from Greece. We hear about Venus, and Venus is basically Aphrodite from ancient Greece with a new name. And we hear about Mars, not the chocolate bar, although the chocolate bar is named after, I don't know if the chocolate bar is named after the god or if the chocolate bar is named after the planet, but the planet is named after the god, and the god Mars is basically the Greek god Ares, the god of war. So we have all of these gods who are kind of borrowed from ancient Greece, right? So Jupiter and Juno and Minerva and Aphrodite and Mars are, or I think I'm getting them all mixed up, but they're borrowed from ancient Greece. So Jupiter is the main god, right? Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, so the most high, the most powerful. His wife is Juno, and she's the patron goddess of marriage because she's married to Jupiter. Juno and Minerva and Venus and Mars, and of course you are, again, if you're recognizing these as the names of planets, of course that's where the planets get their name, right? So we have Mercury, which is a planet, but it's the Roman messenger god, Hermes in Greece. We have Venus, who's the god of love, who's Aphrodite in Greece. We have Mars, who is Ares in Greece. We have Jupiter, who is Zeus. We have Uranus, who is one of the Titans. What's his name? I think he's Kronos in Greek, but we never talked about him. Saturn is a Roman, but also from Greece. I forget his Greek name. Neptune, who is the god of the sea, but of course in Greece we know him as Poseidon. And then Pluto. Pluto is the last planet. But Pluto is the Roman version of Hades, the god of the underworld. So again, the Romans have borrowed from the Greeks and just kind of renamed a lot of their gods. Minerva, goddess of wisdom, or divinity of wisdom, and patron divinity of women's crafts, love and war. Good. Minerva. And they have Cupids too. I forget if Cupid is actually a god or if Cupids are something else. But of course, they are those little babies who fly around and shoot people with bows and arrows and make them fall in love. There are Cupids as well. Kind of cute. Okay, and last question for you. What is the Pontifex Maximus? Besides a really cool title. What's Pontifex Maximus? It is a religious office. Yes, it is. So some politicians would try to gain office of Pontifex Maximus. It is once you gain it, it's yours for life. So the Pontifex Maximus stays that for life. And it's the head of Roman religion. So you could almost think about this like the Pope, if you will. So the head of the religious world is the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome. And so so they're responsible for keeping the Pax Decorum, right? For keeping the peace with the gods. The head of Roman religion. It is a key for political advancement. Yes, it can be very helpful for that, and Julius Caesar will use it for that. Hint, hint. The head of high religion, the head priest of Roman religion. Good. Okay. That's what I want to say. Okay, so we've been working hard for a little bit here. Let's take a 10-minute break. When we come back, we'll review all this. I'll talk a little bit about citations, and then I'll give you something to watch, okay? So go take a break and stretch your legs, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Okay, people, and we're back. So I asked you a few questions there from the textbook that talked a little bit about mostly political offices and how you find your way into them in the Roman Republic, okay? And so I just wanted to show you here. Nope. Okay, let's look at this one first, actually. So this is this ladder that we were talking about early, right? The cursus honorum. And so this is kind of the ladder you have to climb if you want to gain any sort of power in the Roman Republic, right? And so you can see here there's plebeians and patricians, and plebeians, at least initially, are restricted to assembly members and tribunes, and we talked about tribunes having that all-important power of veto, the ability to stop the assembly from voting on something or from voting something through. And then we talked about quaestors, who manage financial and administrative affairs, as you can see there. Aediles, who we didn't talk about, but they look after different aspects of government. Here in Canada, you could almost compare aediles to ministers of certain ministries. We have praetors, who could command the army, but were also heads of Roman law. And then finally, you have consul, right? And so praetors and consuls can be elected dictators in emergencies, and as a dictator can have absolute power for 6 months if Rome happens to be under threat. But there's also senators as well. And so that's kind of why I wanted to show you this graphic here. And so this graphic kind of shows how, now to some degree, it's a little bit of a schematic about how the Roman Republic actually works. And so again, we have patricians and plebeians, and these patricians and plebeians get elected to the assembly. And so very similar to in ancient Greece, the assembly is a group of people who get together and make decisions, right? So they suggest laws, or they suggest courses of action. The assembly will debate and argue about them, and then finally the assembly will vote. Now in this assembly, we should probably mention that it's not one person, one vote. The patricians actually have more voting power than the plebeians do in the assembly, but still the plebeians are represented in the assembly. They get to vote on things, and of course they have tribunes, right? And so the tribunes have that all-important power of veto. We have a number of magistrates, and we talked about those magistrates earlier. Censors, praetors, curulae, oh boy, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, aediles and quaestors. Those are all magistrates that get elected to do particular jobs. And then finally, there are the two consuls who we've talked about, and the consuls are elected by the assembly. Finally, on the top, we have the Senate. And the Senate doesn't have official power, but they have a lot of social and political power in that ex-magistrates and ex-consuls become members of the Senate. And so the Senate is, there's a lot of experience, there's a lot of sort of social power, there's a lot of prominent families who are part of the Senate. And so if the Senate recommends that you do something, you should probably do it. So they have a lot of power in that way. They make recommendations to the assembly, they make recommendations to the consul, and again, you should probably follow the Senate because the Senate has a lot of experience and gravitas, if you will, to use that phrase from yesterday. But this is kind of how the Republic operates for quite some time, for hundreds of years, really. And again, if people want to gain power, if men want to gain power, it's important for them to serve 10 years in the military, and then try to get themselves elected to political office. First a quaestor, and then hopefully they will be able to move up the ladder, and if they're fortunate and if they're good at their jobs, eventually they will become consul, which, as I mentioned, is kind of the highest honor for Roman patricians. Everyone aspires to be a consul for a year, and again, that would bring a lot of honor and respect to you and to your family. Okay, I have a bit of a video for you to watch, and I would like you to watch it, but I don't have any questions for you on it. And the reason I don't is that I think that we have learned enough background to watch this section of the video and kind of understand what's happening. And so the video here is meant to illustrate some of the things that we've already talked about and kind of glue a few of these things that we've talked about together. And so again, I don't have questions for you on this section of the video because it's just meant to kind of illustrate some of the things that we've already learned. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to post that in Microsoft Teams, which I just did. And what I'll ask you to do is go to that link, watch that section of the video, look out for things that we've already talked about, right? Like the Etruscans, the myth about Romulus and Remus, the story of Lucretia, the rape of Lucretia, the creation of the Republic, the Res Publica, and some kind of ideas about what early Rome is like and what kind of Roman values are like. Okay, so we've already, and of course the political organization that we've just talked about. So all of those things will kind of show up in this first section of the video. And I didn't ask you questions because they would be redundant, but I do want you to watch this just so you can get a bit of a visual about what Rome was about and what Rome was like, and for it to illustrate some of the things that we've already talked about, okay? So again, what I'm going to ask you to do is watch the first 15 minutes of the video. Again, the link is in Microsoft Teams. And then come back here in 15 minutes or so and we'll talk about what we've seen, and then I'll talk a little bit about citation in papers, okay? So go watch the video, 15 minutes of it. Enjoy, pay attention to the things that we've already talked about, look for those things, and then we'll come back in 15 minutes or so and keep going, okay? So enjoy the video. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, people, and we're back. So, again, in the video, I think we heard and saw a number of things that we had already talked about, a little bit of the origin story of Rome. Maybe something that we didn't talk about was the fact that Rome was very militaristic, really from day one. They throw off their Etruscan kings, right, the Tarquins, and they fight civil wars with the Etruscans for quite some time. And after that period, they continue to attack people next door to them, and they do it for two reasons. The first reason is that they are suspicious of their neighbors, right? And so the Romans always kind of looked at the culture or the people that lived next to them and thought, are they going to attack us? I don't know. Maybe we should attack them first, and that way we won't be caught off guard. And so they were a little bit paranoid, and so they would often attack the people next to them in order to make sure that they weren't attacked. But of course, the problem is that once you attack your neighbors and take over their land, then you have new neighbors, right? And so you look over at your new neighbors and think, are they going to attack us? We're not really sure. Maybe we should attack them first. And so that's kind of what they do. And so the Romans kind of continue to attack their neighbors because they're a little bit paranoid about being attacked themselves. But the other thing that happens is that when you attack and take over more territory, that brings in more money and more wealth into Rome. And so they would often claim that they were trying to attack in order to defend Rome. But over time it became, this is a good way to get rich, right? So the Romans would continually attack and take over more land because it meant that they wouldn't be attacked themselves, but also it made them very wealthy. And so they continued to do this. And so you see this kind of happening at the very beginning. Rome is expansionist. They start taking over more and more land. Okay, so the last thing I'll talk about is citations, because I think there was a question last week about citing sources. And for those of you who are in social justice, this might be a bit of a little bit of deja vu, but I guess that's okay. So when you're citing things in a paper, you want to cite things that are data, so specific data, or you want to cite things that are ideas that belong to a particular researcher, okay? So you don't want to cite things that are kind of general common knowledge. So, for this class, spoiler alert, Julius Caesar is murdered in 44 BCE, okay? It's a fact, but you wouldn't cite it because it's pretty broadly known. It wasn't really discovered by one person. It's not a theory that one person is arguing. It's a pretty commonly known piece of information. So you might read it somewhere, but you can just say it because it's something that is very commonly known. If you remember way back when we read the Jared Diamond article on the worst mistake in the history of the human race, which was the switch to agriculture, if you wanted to say that, if you wanted to say that in your paper, if you wanted to say agriculture was a huge mistake for human beings and caused all kinds of negative problems, you can say that, but that was Jared Diamond's idea, right? So you should cite it at the end. You should say Diamond 1997 or whenever that article was, right? So that was kind of his idea. You can say it and you can work it into whatever you're trying to say, but you have to cite that idea because it's his, right? It's the idea that he was arguing. The thing about Caesar, everybody knows that about Caesar. You don't have to cite it. Now, part of the difficulty that you might run into is that if you're not very familiar with a certain discipline or a certain kind of topic area, you might not know what is common knowledge and what isn't. And so there's a little bit of a learning process of trying to figure out what is the stuff that everybody knows and what's the stuff that only certain people know. Because if you're new to a field, you might not know anything. Everything's new to you. But generally, that's what you want to do. In terms of quoting things, you have to quote things when you're using someone's actual words, when you're using the specific words, the exact words someone uses. Like I said in social justice, I would encourage you not to do that in this type of paper. Generally, the stuff that students quote it doesn't really help what they're saying. It kind of just gets in the way of what they're saying. And the specific words are not that important. And so the example I used in social justice was if you're writing an essay on one of Shakespeare's sonnets, and you want to say, well, when Shakespeare says this thing, this is what he means, then you should quote Shakespeare, because those exact words are going to be important when you interpret them, right? So in that situation, you're going to say, Shakespeare says this, blah, 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 blah. What he really means is, and then you explain it. So that's a good place to quote actual words. But for most of the stuff in kind of social sciences, it's usually not worth quoting something unless you really need to hear the exact words that someone said. And in many cases, you don't need to do that. So I would say you probably don't need to quote things, but you do need to cite things. And so, for instance, if you use Jared Diamond's idea about agriculture being a huge mistake for people, then you should cite that. In terms of formatting, I think, oops, oh yeah, here's my MLA format, but I've got to make it bigger. So this is the Purdue University website that I've sent some of you to, and I think the link that I've included. And again, it can help you to cite your source using this little handy tool, or you can simply look at the format below. Okay, and so if you look here, yeah, so here we have one. Here we have a citation for a journal article in the Tulsa Studies in Women's Literature. And so the important parts of this format are kind of where the periods are, where the commas are, where the quotations are. You can see the quotations here are around the title of this article. The journal that it comes from, you can see, are in italics, so the text kind of leans to one side. And so those are the kind of things that you need to pay attention to, the periods and the commas and the italics and things like that. For things that you access online, usually you need to include this, right? You need to include that you accessed that source on a certain day, because of course websites can change, they can be updated, and so you always want to tell people when you looked at this website. Yeah. So, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. So, again, when you're citing things, try not to quote unless you really need the exact words that somebody said. Cite the ideas and the data that doesn't belong to you, but you don't have to cite things that are common knowledge, right? The Roman Empire was incredibly significant to world history. Yeah, everybody knows that, so you don't have to cite it. But if you come across articles that have something that the author is arguing, or that has specific data that comes from them, that you need to cite. And again, if you have questions, I can always help you out with that. I don't know if that helped at all, but maybe maybe that's what I should ask you. Did that help at all? I know it wasn't a lot of information, but sometimes I feel like people have a really good handle on citing and sourcing, and sometimes people don't, and it's hard for me to tell. But what do you think? Or do you have other questions that you want me to ask or to answer, or specific questions on citing sources and things? Because I can do that. Okay, so Casey says yes. When are we student? I'm gonna send for social justice. I'm gonna send it today, Karen. I just ran out of time yesterday. For comparative cultures, I'm gonna try to finish those today. I'm a little bit behind. They take a little longer than you might think, but I'm gonna get through those by the end of today, so I can get them back to you. Yes. Yes. Curly says yes. Okay. Okay. And again, I know it's a little bit tough when you're new to a subject area, right? Because again, once you've sort of been in a subject area for a while and you've learned some things, you kind of know what's common knowledge, and you know what is, this person's theory or this person's idea, and so you kind of know better what to cite and what not to. When you're just kind of starting out, it's tough to know what's common knowledge, because to you, none of it might be common knowledge, right? So I might tell you that Caesar was murdered in 44 BCE, and you might say, really? I didn't know that. But here I am telling you, yeah, everybody knows that, don't worry about it. So again, if you don't know anything, it's tough to know what everybody else knows. And so I acknowledge that it's difficult when you're starting out to cite. I guess when in doubt, if you're in doubt, it's always safer to cite something. Especially some people will charge you with plagiarism very quickly, and so sometimes it's best to cite something if you don't know. Okay, so seeing no more questions for you, I'm going to end it there. Come back tomorrow and we'll talk a little bit about Rome's history of conquest and how they sort of start to build their empire. And yeah, I think that's what we'll do tomorrow. I might have something else too, but I'm still working it out. Okay, so that's all for today. Those of you who participated in the live chat, good work, you did a good job. I hope you have a lovely rest of the afternoon. Stay cool, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so